Today we're going to be talking about formative and summative assessments. And my name is Dr. Yvonne Johnson, and I work in the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning. And I work with professors and instructors who teach in all modalities, whether it's face-to-face, hybrid, all online, accelerated courses. I teach graduate students and undergraduate students, and this year I'm teaching a UNIV 101 course, which is really fun because it's brand new students. And then next semester I'll be teaching a doctoral cohort in a research course. So I have taught a wide variety of different students, and I've taught educational technology as well. To get the connection started, in the chat, or if your microphone's working, Alicia, your microphone is working, but you can put this in the chat. You can put your name, your department, what you teach or what your role is at NIU, and then what does assessment mean to you? If you would type that in the chat, or if you want to engage your microphone, that's fine too. So when you think about assessment, what does that mean to you? And let's take a moment to share your names and your departments. And I'll just go down the list. Alicia, could you, what department are you from?
I'm housed in the electrical engineering department, but I teach in the biomedical engineering program.
Okay. And so your name's Alicia Diggs?
Yes.
Okay. So you're housed in electrical engineering, but you teach in biomedical. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, awesome. And what does assessment mean to you?
Um, I guess the first thing I think about assessment is testing. Um, but I know it goes a little bit deeper than the actual test, but it's how is it that I gauge what information the students are learning or retaining and how they're processing the information that I'm given. I guess is
Hmm.
the best way I would explain how I think about it.
Okay, great. Great. That's good. That's a good frame of reference for our discussion today. And thank you for sharing that. And so Fortunata says you're in ETRA and you'll teach the Swahili. You teach the Swahili language. Okay. And are you a graduate student? Matt, MS. What program are you completing the graduate program in ETRA, Fortunata? TA? Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. And what does assessment mean to you if you had to put it in a couple of words? Okay, that's a good question. Alicia's asking, what is ETRA? It's the Department of Educational Technology, Research and Assessment, and that's housed in the College of Education. Um, so does that help, Alicia? Okay, great. And then Zachary Wall, you're an associate professor in kinesiology, physical education, and okay, great. And Zach, what does assessment mean to you, Zachary? Okay, yes, that's a good point, Alicia, about the acronyms, and thank you for asking that because sometimes we use them and we don't realize that uh, they're not known to everybody. So thank you for asking that. Yes, and Fortunata, process of analyzing progress and use of information to improve. Yes, yes, that definitely relates to assessment. Thank you. And when we're talking today, we'll talk about feedback and assessment, and you'll see and you know that assessment is a way to provide feedback to your students. Um, so we'll use feedback and assessment um, in some ways almost interchangeably. And there are different types of assessments. There's formative and summative assessments, and then we'll talk about the differences between those, and we'll talk about a variety of techniques for assessing students' knowledge and skills. And when we talk about assessments, you need to think about the process for creating assessments. And so let's just do a little data collection. What types of assessment strategies are you currently using in your classes? You've talked about that there's some tests, there's ways to analyze progress and collect information. What types of assessments are you using now? If you use tests, can you, some sort of a test, can you raise your hand? Okay, all right, so Alicia, you have some tests. If you do some kind of skills assessment to see if they can demonstrate certain skills, maybe it's something that they need to do in, okay, so Alicia does skills assessments. There are also projects that they might need to complete. Okay, have no tests, interactive. Okay, so Alicia's talking about you have tests and interactive activities. Okay, and Alicia, I see you have your hand up. Did you want to share something?
No, I thought you were asking us to raise our hand if we were doing projects.
Oh, yes, I was. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, so you have a variety of different types of assessments and ways that you give feedback to the students. Okay, great. Thank you, Alicia. Yes, I was. So thank you. When we're talking about the process of creating assessments, you need to think about that in a strategic way. And okay, so Fortunata says you have short quizzes and discussion boards. Yes, those are definitely ways that you can get kind of gauge students' knowledge and give them feedback. Great, thank you. And as I was saying, when you're creating assessments, you need to think about it in a strategic way. And first think about the objectives. What do, of the course, what do students need to know? What do they need to be able to do by the time they get out of this course? And then how are you going to have students show you that they are competent and knowledgeable in achieving these objectives? And then how are you going to assess their proficiency level? What kind of criteria are you going to use? What does good performance on this project look like? What does good performance in this um, interactive activity look like? What does less than adequate performance look like? And then create a rubric, and you can share your expectations with students. And we have a separate rubrics workshop later this month. I'll be conducting that as well. If you're interested in more information on rubrics, then you can go to that session. So it's important to think about, what are the goals for the course? What are those objectives? And then how are you going to assess them? And then how are you going to determine the quality? Um, and then how are you going to grade them and share those standards with students? And when you're providing feedback to students, and we'll talk about formative and summative feedback and assessments. When you're providing feedback, it's most effective when it's timed appropriately. So if you're having students work on some daily activity and you want to provide some information to them so that they can change and improve their performance, then you want to give that feedback close in time to when they have completed that project or when they've submitted the test, so that then they can take action to refine their knowledge or their process and continue to improve. So um, one of the things that's it's important to be cognizant of is when you have people. So if you give an assessment, a test, or they submit a project or something, the feedback should be provided within a reasonable time after the assessment is completed. Because if it's too far down the road, if it's weeks or a month or something after, the students have moved on and they're not really thinking about refining that information or their behavior on those types of assessments, because it's, a month has passed and they're thinking about something else by that time. So think about the timing and how important that is to share timely feedback. And I mentioned that there are formative and summative types of assessments and feedback. And basically the difference is that formative assessments and feedback are occurring when the students are learning this new information, learning these new skills, learning the new content, and you're providing them suggestions for improvement, you're providing them clarification, and then they're expected to take that clarification and knowledge, that feedback that you're giving them, and then continue to work on that project and produce the best project that they can. Um, and the formative feedback is often low stakes. You might be giving short types of feedback, types of opportunities during a class session. And then in also thinking about summative feedback. Summative feedback is, think of it in terms of those big projects students do at the end of the class, kind of a cumulative type of a project, a midterm, a final. Those are summative feedback. And one difference is that if a student completes a major project at the end of the course, then that's a summary assessment of what they've demonstrated they've learned in the course, and the course is over. There's not an opportunity for them to improve on that grade, but they could take the feedback and improve that they're going to do this particular type of project in their job, let's say. In the summative, those more major assessments and feedback tend to be quantitative and they're higher stakes, so they're worth more points, and they're identifying students learning. And when you're thinking about what kind of assessments you might use, think about some of these points. Does it make sense to use an individual type of an assessment or a group assessment? And why does that make sense? Sometimes you can have students work with their peers and they can provide each other feedback. Or is it going to be graded, or is it not going to be graded, or is reflection part of it? How much detail is required? And when you're talking about making a decision on these different considerations, you might think about where students are in their program of study. If they're early in their program of study, you might expect less details because they haven't built up as much content knowledge as the students who are in their last year of their program of study. If it's going to be graded or not graded, you might just want to do a quick formative assessment in your class to get some quick feedback, and you might just give them a check that they completed this or they didn't complete this. And reflection is something that there's extensive research to show that reflection can really help in students learning, and I integrate reflective prompts in my classes a lot. to help students to help them to see and identify what they've learned and how they might apply it in other courses or in their jobs. And feedback strategies. So you have provided some different feedback and assessment strategies that you use. Sometimes we use assessments, a pre-term assessment, to be able to gauge that where are the students at when they're starting the course. And when I taught educational technology, I often did some sort of a pre-term foundational technology knowledge survey to get an idea of, okay, do I need to cover these certain tools in the class, or do they already know this? You might have students conduct group work. Um, you can set up, we all have office hours. You could have students um, meet with you on an individual basis. A lot of professors support students in helping them go to conferences to be able to share their knowledge. There's Blackboard tools you can use, and if you're in face-to-face sessions, you can gauge the body language. That's a little bit different online, but you can gauge the texts and the interactions and things like that. And some of you might be teaching synchronous courses online, or maybe a hybrid where you have some face-to-face courses and some synchronous or asynchronous courses. So you have to think about what's the best way to provide that feedback. And sometimes what you can do is create a little video that maybe summarizes. Perhaps you had a discussion board, or you had a test, and there was a certain issue that seemed to kind of be difficult for the students. So you might want to create a short video and then provide clarification in that and say, okay, we've gone through this concept in the course. It seems like there's still some questions about it. Let me clarify. And then providing that video is a way to, you're explaining it in, they can see you, they can hear you, and they feel that there's a human presence in the course too, and that helps. Now, we talked about formative and summative assessment. So the formative ones are ways that you provide feedback to the students when they're learning. And then the summative are those midterms and finals, are big class projects. In the courses that you teach, which assessments would you say do you use formative assessments? If you do, you can raise your hand, or you can turn on your microphone and explain how you use formative assessments to provide feedback when the students are learning. So when I'm looking at these, okay, Fortunata, go ahead, please. Yeah, your microphone is not working. Okay, thank you for typing. Okay, so you use formative assessment, and could you briefly describe what kind of formative assessment you use for Tuanada? Okay, so a short quiz every 2 weeks, and so you're keeping tabs on tracking their learning regularly throughout the course. Okay, that's great. And then how do you provide them feedback on the quiz? Do you discuss it in a class, or do you provide them comments, like written comments in Blackboard, or how do you provide the feedback on the quizzes? Or are they more quantitative, where they check boxes? Okay, so you write comments on the quiz. Okay, that's a great example of of a formative assessment where you're keeping ongoing track of the students' development in their learning. Okay, great, great. Um, and then in terms of summative assessments, those are the assessments that are used to gauge the student's learning and more like a big project at the end of the course or a midterm or a final. Do any of you use midterms or finals or large high stakes projects in your courses? Okay, Alicia, so you use summative assessments. Could you describe what types of summative assessments you use in your courses, please?
So in the current course, it would be there's a midterm and there's a final, and then there's also a project that they're working on that along the during the course of the semester there may be milestones that they have to meet. Um, so, for instance, the first thing due to me is a proposal on, what their design project is. There'll be some feedback on that. Another milestone may be to submit a bibliography from their literature review. It may be uh, a piece of what the introduction is, or maybe what the outline of the project is, so on and so forth, and it culminates in a final paper and an oral presentation.
Okay, so so it sounds like you have a, a large, multifaceted, high stakes project at the end of the course, and then these prior assignments are scaffolded to build up to that larger project at the end. And so you're giving them feedback as they're doing these other assignments through the course. Is that does that sound like an
Yes,
okay? All
yes.
right, great. Yep, that's terrific because you're providing them feedback. So you have the summative and the formative, and then you're providing them feedback, and they can improve their work. And then at the end, they'll have their best work. Yep, that's terrific. Thank you.
Mhm.
And some different feedback strategies. Um, you can, if you're in a class face to face, you can tell by their verbal feedback. You can model examples of of high quality work, what you expect. You can to encourage students to participate and respond to your feedback. You can, give positive support to them in the class, or whether that's face to face or if it's online. Thank them for participating, and so that'll help to get that conversation going, and then they're more likely to use that feedback that you're providing them to improve their work in the class and then beyond when they're applying this in their life. And we have several different disciplines represented in here. We've had so Alicia's talking about biomedical engineering, and then we have uh, teaching Swahili, and we have kinesiology and physical education. And so there's different types of assessments and feedback. Maybe they have to perform some type of task in a lab, or in an athletic type of a situation, or they need to speak. Yes, it will, Alicia. I will send out that link after it's over. Okay, so you think about, as I said before, what are the objectives? If if your objectives are that they speak fluent at a certain level of complexity for the Swahili language, maybe you would have them record themselves reading something or presenting something, and then you can give them feedback on that. or maybe they need to do experiments or case studies. Um, but it's good to use several different types of assessments because it helps you gauge. Some students are very comfortable writing, some students are very comfortable speaking, some students are comfortable with maybe doing a performance. And I had a class I was teaching in several years ago, and one of the students was very quiet, and it was an online class, and he was very quiet. And I was thinking about what kinds of opportunities I could provide them as options to show their competence in these different educational technology um, concepts that we were talking about. And so I developed an assignment that had different options, so they could do a video presentation, or they could create a website, or they could write a paper. I had write a discussion board. There were several different options, and when I included the video option, the student who hadn't really been participating, he just really became very engaged because he was very comfortable with sharing his knowledge in a video type of format. So think about ways you can use different types of assessments because it can make a difference in how students show their competence and knowledge that they're learning in the class. And the example on the screen, the start, stop, continue, that's a very quick type of formative assessment that you could do in any course. And you could ask students, okay, what occurred today that is work that what would you like me to start doing that I haven't been doing in the class? And they're supposed to um, give you a rationale for that. So if they say they want you to provide, maybe they say, I don't think we should have any tests in the class, so stop having tests. And then, some things might be not realistic, but if they say, I want you to start providing video explanations of some of the complex topics, and they say, well, I can see the captions on the video, and it helps me to learn because I'm seeing and I'm hearing and I'm reading the information. Then that's a good rationale for um, why they might be requesting something. And then you as the professor need to decide if this fits in with your plan for the course, um, and if it's reasonable in terms of time requirements and things like that. And they could say, okay, I want you to stop XYZ, here's the rationale, or continue. So you've done some kind of, let's say you do some kind of a pre-assessment quick um, data gathering at the beginning of every class. And then you do some kind of debrief at the end, and they might say, I really want you to continue that because it's working. Now, when you use these quick assignments, assessments, there's a couple more. The 1 minute paper. Okay, so Alicia's saying, how do you address, let's see, how do you address if it doesn't fit in? Yes, you want to, and that's a very good point, Alicia. These three options here, the start, stop, continue, or the 1 minute paper, you might ask them for significant concepts that they've learned during the class. What questions do they still have? And then another one is, what's going well in the course, what's not going well. And Alicia brings up a good point in that if when you have students complete these um, assessments, when you ask them for feedback, then you need to let them know what you're doing with that. So if someone said, I really want to not have um, this continue in the class, or I really want you to add XYZ in the class. And if you evaluate this suggestion and you decide that it doesn't fit with the course, then you say, okay, I looked at all of your suggestions. I took them into consideration. We're going to implement these, these two because they have an impact for everybody. We won't be able to implement this one because of, it kind of takes the focus in a different direction than this course is really designed. But I'm happy to talk to, the person who made this suggestion, set up time to meet with me in office hours and we can talk about it further. But you raise a good point, Alicia, that we want to make sure that the students, when they're providing feedback, that we acknowledge it and that their voices are important. So yeah, very good point. Thank you. And then there's high impact practices. And high impact practices, there's quite a bit of data on that to show that these practices, they're engaging, they have a significant impact on the students' retention of the knowledge and the depth and breadth of the knowledge that they learn when they're engaged in these high impact practices. They're likely to remember the more complex information for longer. It'll move into their long term memory, as opposed to if they just quickly memorize some concepts for a test and then they just kind of um, write it all on the test and then they kind of forget it. But high impact practices are there was a study by the Association of American Colleges and Universities, and they identified these high impact practices that you can integrate in your courses to really have a significant impact on students' learning. So if you are thinking about a project, sometimes these could even be a program. Maybe it's a culmination of a program of study. And collaborative assignments are important. And when I'm talking about collaborative assignments, there's two aspects of it that are important. And so they're working and solving problems in the company of others, and they're refining and sharpening their own understanding by listening to others' insights. They're it's it's more than working with a group of students. It's working together to really struggle through that complex issues that you're trying to resolve on. Maybe it's a complex biomedical engineering issue or a complex um, issue with the Swahili language or with the um, physical education and kinesiology. Every person that is collaborating needs to, respect the other people and work together to solve the problems together. And they're learning from the other people in that collaborative project and getting the insights from different perspectives, and they learn uh, um, more than they would if they didn't get those other perspectives. And service learning, we have a number of people or some programs at NIU do service learning on a regular basis. The When you see some of the COVID projects, some of the people in the health sciences might have been administering the vaccinations, let's say, or people from the public administration sometimes volunteer in the community. These are field-based experiential learning um, opportunities where they're working with community partners, and it's really authentic experience, and the students can see, okay, this is what I would really be doing if I'm a healthcare provider at a county, or if I work in a circuit clerk's office or something. And they when you're working with service learning, it's helpful to have them apply concepts from the class and then reflect on it. So they learned about a certain concept in the class, and then they went to this community partner and they used those skills and knowledge, and then have them reflect on that and identify what they learned, what were the challenges, how did they overcome that, things like that. And NIU has Office of Student Engagement and Experiential Learning, and so there's a lot of opportunities there too. And that's another high impact practice that has a lasting impact on students' learning. And then capstone projects. Now, Alicia was talking about a big design project that they do in biomedical engineering. And my nephew was in the biomedical engineering program at a different university, and they designed a wheelchair to help people with certain limitations. And it was really neat to see those types of projects being used by people. Sometimes some of the programs at NIU use portfolios, and the students will put together examples of their big projects, of their best work. There might be a theater production, or you might have a panel where students present their information as experts on a panel, or a website. That's fairly common these days. Case studies. Do any of you use case studies in the courses, either as a student in courses you're taking or as a professor in courses that you're teaching? Case studies are often used to provide students with real life examples of complex issues that might come up in your discipline. So we have, okay, let's see. Okay, yep, okay. All right, so that's something to consider. Okay, thank you. So we talked about some of these different feedback strategies. How do you think you might use some of them in your courses? Let's see. For instance, this 1-minute paper, it's something that you would give students like the last 5 minutes of class, just give them a minute to write these things down. And then you collect it, and then you have information from the students in that session. Does that seem like something that you might be able to use in a course you're teaching? Anyone? You could ask them about the concepts they learned. What are the significant concepts they learned today? What questions remain in their mind? I've had instructors use that in courses that I've taught, and what happens is that the instructor can see a theme, and then they say, okay, 14 people brought up that they still have questions about this concept, so we're going to have to go over that again. And something you would do anonymously. You could. I have the students write their name, because it's, if there's some kind of a complex question, I want to be able to help them, if they need some more help. So I always just have them write their name, but the questions that you're asking are, what are the concepts that they learned today? What do they still have some questions about? So they're, and also, what can they do as a student? Now, sometimes I'll just ask the first 3 questions. Maybe if there's participation issues, I might ask the students in maybe a journal on Blackboard or something to reflect on what could they do differently to do better on exams and stuff. But you might not ask all of those questions. But if you did it anonymously, let's say you did the question number 4 anonymously, and then you say, okay, 75% of the class said that they really realized that they needed to increase their class participation. Then you'd share that with the class. So you kind of have to think about when it makes sense to do it anonymously, and when it makes sense to have them do write their name on it. Yes, good question, Alicia. Okay, and concept mapping is really an interesting way to have students share their knowledge. They can share facts, they can share how information connects together, um, how they view the concepts creatively, and what you can ask students to do. And I had a class where the professor asked us to draw concept maps of our readings, and I think we did it maybe 10 times. They were low stakes, but we drew a concept map that represented some sort of instructional design model we were learning about, or some sort of theory. And then we designed a concept map. And what you can see in the way the students prepare the concept map is, if you're looking at this map and there's some kind of a hierarchical type of relationship demonstrated, and the concept that you are teaching them is really not hierarchical, then you can see that they don't have a clear understanding of the content that you were talking about. So there might be a spider type of a concept map where there's a central theme, and then all of these other ideas relate to that theme and come out of that theme. Or maybe there's a flow chart where different steps have to follow other steps. Yes, Alicia, did you have a question?
Yeah, so if and when you're doing concept mapping, um, it seems like, and I guess I'm looking for you to say whether this part is true. There's a lesson that needs to be given about what it is and how to do it. And the reason I'm saying that is, when I think about how I brainstorm, let's say before I even had any idea of concept mapping, I write a bunch of ideas down and I might draw a connection, but my connection drawing may not have been as, say, systematic as some of these connection drawings that you're showing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, would I need to give instruction on how to do it, or do I just say map these things and I try to gauge from what's being presented to me how they seem to be interpreting, um, how things connect and how things relate.
That's a really good question, Alicia. And since this could be the first time that the students have been asked to prepare a concept map to represent their understanding of the theory, let's say, then I think it is a very good idea to kind of give them an introduction and say, okay, explain what it is. I'm using this. I'm going to teach you about the biomedical theory of X. And then I'm going to ask you to draw a concept map. And I would probably have them do this at home, um, to practice, because if you just have them do it in, let's say, a 50-minute class, they might not have enough time to kind of process it and actually do it. But yes, I would explain to them what you're looking for, why you're asking for this, because you're trying to see how they demonstrate how these different parts of this um, theory connect with each other. And you could even show them, maybe there's a spider or a hierarchy, but when they get more comfortable with it, they'll start to draw. Because I remember myself as a student, I drew a tree, and then there were these, there were roots. So those were foundational concepts. And then out of them came some different kind of main themes in the discipline. And then in those main themes, there were little branches. And so off of them came certain key terms and things like that. Um, but it's a good idea to explain to them why you're doing it, and I would make it low stakes, because you want to encourage them to do it, but it's take a little bit of time to get comfortable with it, um, and what you also might do is you might share a concept map as part of your lecture. Maybe you have one that represents some kind of a design that you're talking about, that you're going to talk about. And then you could use that as an example. Um, but yeah, that's a good idea to kind of start off with explaining what it is and why you're doing it. Good idea, Alicia. And you can do mid-class assessments. People often do those to kind of get an idea of, okay, where are we at in the halfway through the course? Do we need to change something? And then you can make changes for the remaining aspects of the semester. And reflective writing is something that can be used, helps students to think about their own learning, and they can gain insights, if they're writing about, okay, I learned this in the module, the chapter, but I really struggle with X, and why was that? Is this something I've always struggled with? Do I need to get some more help with that? It can kind of help them to gain insights about themselves, and when they gain insights about themselves, it's powerful, and it's not always coming from the professor. They need to get to where they're self-directed and can learn about their own learning and take actions about that. So reflective learning, reflective writing can help with that. And I will send you the link to this PowerPoint, and then you can have these different examples. Okay, has anybody used a mid-course assessment in their courses? I know I've had a number of professors who've used that. Okay. Yeah, it depends if you think it fits or not, but sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And assessments in large classes, in terms of how the course is going. Okay, all right, so thank you, Alicia. Yes, you might use an online forum for collecting information in a larger class. You might use some of the professors use a clicker response system that we have on campus. You can use different types of modeling answers. You can have peer assessments where like two students work together and they provide each other feedback, and that's a way to deal with that. There's so many students in the class, but they're still getting engaged and getting feedback. And it's important to have a feedback policy. And so you would say, my expectation or my goal is that I would provide feedback to on the assignments within X amount of time. Maybe it's within a week or whatever it is, and set the parameters for due dates and guidelines if you have how you handle late assignments, and email etiquette if you have students who are just coming into the university. They might need some refreshers on email etiquette. I know when my daughter was going from high school to college, I said, now you're going to have to check your email, and she said, well, nobody uses email anymore. I said, well, your professors will, so you need to be sure to check email. And so some students don't use email that much, but yeah, just let them know how they're going to be receiving feedback and what they can expect. And it's important to communicate how the students will be graded. And as I said, there's a rubrics workshop in a couple of weeks, and provide useful and relevant comments. A couple of you had said that you put comments on their assignments, and that's good. If you use that Blackboard inline grading tool, it really does help, and it's a easy to use tool. And rubrics can help you to make sure you're grading fair and equitably using the same standards for everybody. And it helps you provide feedback and grade the assessments quicker, which is helpful to everybody. And sometimes you might want to use some brief videos to provide feedback. We have a Kaltura system at NIU, which is very easy to use, and it's a way that you can provide short video feedback to students. You can, several people have mentioned Blackboard that they use, and you can provide feedback in there. Sometimes professors include in their discussion boards, they have a help question, and then students can ask for help about something, and then other students can help them, or you can help them. If you do have one of those help um, one of those help threads in your discussion boards, just make sure you monitor that, because when other students answer, you want to make sure that they're providing the correct answer to their colleagues. And so in terms of assessments, reflect on the teaching process and emphasize student learning, and identify the strategies for improving particular aspects of teaching and learning. So when you're reflecting on the teaching process, Alicia brought this up earlier. Tell students what you're going to do with the feedback and why you're using it. Ask students how they can change. So there's a responsibility for the students to be partners and self-directed in their learning process too, and emphasize that the feedback and the assessment, they're constructive. You're helping them, and collect when you're asking for student input. Collect what you can and will respond to. If you're not going to have time to respond to it, then don't collect it, because then they'll feel like their perspectives aren't important, and the student perspectives are important. So you have to balance that with your workload. And when students are interpreting the feedback, and when you're interpreting feedback, there'll be positive and not so positive comments, and just kind of keep it in perspective. And if you ask for feedback from a large class, then you could share a random sample of the say, okay, I'm going to ask 10% of the students to provide feedback on XYZ. And so you think about what you as an instructor, professor can change and revise. And then the students also should be thinking about what they can change and revise. And if you're thinking about assessments, you can bounce off ideas with your colleagues and see what they think. If you're thinking about adding a case study or thinking about adding a concept map, and ask them, ask a colleague who's experienced if they think that might work the way you're trying to design it and might use it in your class. And it's important to, thank students for sharing their input with you, and to be honest and share the summary. So if you collect some feedback, let's say a stop, start, continue feedback on Friday, then on Monday you should really say, okay, I collected this feedback on Friday, and here's what you all said, and here's what we're going to do. So you're letting the students know what action you're going to take in response to the information they shared. And you want to make sure that you close the loop, and that students know when you're providing them comments and feedback on the assessments that that they need to modify their behavior and their work in the class, and you need to modify. Okay, think about what you can modify in your teaching to continue to close that loop with assessments and feedback and improvement um, of learning and knowledge. And just a summary feedback or assessments, it's a form of a response to a task. It monitors a progress, and Fanutana said that you had every 2 weeks you did a quiz in the class, so that's a way to monitor the progress. And the feedback can be used for both the students and the professor to improve the teaching and learning. And we talked about formative and summative feedback and why those are both important. And we have about 2 minutes left. Are there any last um, um, concepts that you want to share about feedback? Is there maybe a type of assessment that we talked about today that you might consider using in your class? I know a couple of people said case studies might be something that they would use, and midterm assessment was something that um, one Alicia said, you said that you use it in a different way, so that's something to keep in mind. How does it make sense to use the type of assessment? Okay, so for an
I,
entire,
I think for
okay, go ahead.
me, like there's so many, I have so many ideas, and I find that sometimes I feel like sometimes I am more worried about the assessment piece and making their learning experience a good one than I am about the coursework. I don't, maybe that's normal. It doesn't bother me too much, but I do spend a lot of mental energy um, thinking about, how do I get them to participate, or what kind of skill sets are they going to need? Engineers, we all know they need the technical experience, but what we benefit the most from so is so much bigger than that. And so how do I get them to learn how to work in teams in a class that's not uh, like there's no lab practical component to it, right?
Hmm.
It's ideas, and to some, I don't want to call it theory, but it's a lot of applications. And so how do I get them to work in teams? How do I get them to make sure that they're comfortable speaking to people? How do I get them to understand how to tailor their conversation about their technical field to audiences, of different skill levels? How do I, it's those kinds of things that I spend the most time thinking about. I didn't always think about them in terms of being assessments, so I at least feel good knowing, oh, you mean this idea that I had for them to teach a concept to a group of middle school students is actually an assessment? I didn't really think about it like that. I just thought about it as a way to practice, how to relate information to different audiences. I don't know. So it's good, but I just feel overwhelmed sometimes by all the ideas that are out there and how to rein them in and choose one or two that really fit, because you can't do everything at one time.
Yeah, and you just really pinpointed the approach is you absolutely cannot do all of that at one time. And what I always recommend to professors is that consider your course and then pick some aspect of it that you really think you might want to work on that aspect, and then identify the assessment or whatever part of that course you're working on. And then once you kind of get that running smoothly, then go to another aspect. And because otherwise, like you said, there are so many approaches out there, and you'll be refining, all of us will be refining our teaching throughout our entire careers. So it's a good idea to kind of gradually implement these changes, and then you'll get comfortable with them, with the changes in your course, and the students will, and it'll be manageable because we don't want anybody to be overwhelmed. So does that help a little bit?
It does.
Okay,
Thank
all right,
you.
thank you. Okay, you're welcome.